I'm Henriette, 32, and I've always been the responsible one. Since graduating college, I've worked tirelessly at my accounting firm, saving every penny possible for one purpose: giving my parents the home they always dreamed of. After years of sacrifice, I finally had enough for the down payment on a modest house. But what should have been the proudest moment of my life turned into a nightmare when I discovered my parents had secretly forged my signature and transferred the deed to my younger sister. Before I share this heartbreaking journey, take a second to let me know where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about family betrayal and finding strength when those closest to you let you down. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland wasn't always easy. My parents, Robert and Gloria, constantly struggled with finances, and we always lived in small, cramped apartments. I remember the thin walls, the temperamental heating, and the constant stress that hung in our home like a fog. My father would often sit at our tiny kitchen table, bills spread out before him, sighing as he calculated how to make it through another month. One day, he'd say, looking out our apartment window at the homes across the street, "I'll have a place of my own with a garden where I can grow tomatoes and sit outside on summer evenings." Those dreams seemed so modest, yet so unattainable for him. I'd watch his eyes light up when he talked about having his own piece of land, something that belonged to him that couldn't be taken away by a landlord or bank. My mother, Gloria, had her own way of dealing with our financial situation. She'd constantly compare me to my younger sister, Amanda, who was 4 years my junior. "Why can't you be outgoing like your sister?" she'd ask. Or, "Amanda has such natural talent. She'll go places." The comparisons were relentless, and even as a child I could see the favoritism clearly. Amanda was the pretty one with her perfect curls and winning smile. I was the plain one with glasses and braces, more comfortable with books than people. While Amanda excelled in dance recitals and school plays, receiving thunderous applause, and our parents' beaming approval, I quietly maintained straight A's and tutored other students after school. "Henrietta is so serious," my mother would tell relatives at family gatherings, not as a compliment, but with a tone suggesting I was somehow deficient for not being as carefree as Amanda. Despite the lack of encouragement, I excelled academically. I was determined to build a secure future, partly because I had witnessed firsthand how financial instability could erode a family's happiness. In high school, when career counselors asked about my plans, I didn't hesitate. Accounting. It wasn't glamorous, but I had seen the power money held over my family's life, and I wanted to understand and master it. College years were grueling. Unlike Amanda, who later received our parents' financial support to pursue an arts degree at an expensive private university, I cobbled together scholarships, loans, and worked multiple jobs. I served coffee at the campus cafe before morning classes, tutored in the afternoons, and waitressed on weekends. Sleep was a luxury I could rarely afford, but I never let my grades slip. I still remember the nights I'd call home exhausted from a double shift, hoping for some encouragement. Instead, I'd hear about Amanda's latest exhibition or performance. "Your sister is really finding herself," my mother would gush before asking, almost as an afterthought, how my money classes were going. After graduation, landing my first job at Peterson and Marsh, a prestigious accounting firm in Seattle, felt like a triumph. The starting salary wasn't extraordinary, but it was stable with clear paths for advancement. On my first day, I set up a separate savings account and made a promise to myself I would give my parents the home they never had. My plan was ambitious but simple. I would live as frugally as possible, save aggressively, and within a decade have enough for a substantial down payment on a modest house for them. Meanwhile, Amanda completed her arts degree and moved back home to find herself, while working part-time at a gallery and relying on our parents for support. During those early years at the firm, I'd visit home for holidays and occasional weekends. Each time the pattern was the same. Amanda was the center of attention, her latest creative project dissected and praised, while my career advancement received cursory acknowledgement. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say when I mentioned a promotion, before turning the conversation back to Amanda's artistic struggles and potential. What hurt more than the lack of interest in my accomplishments was seeing my parents' apartment deteriorate. The ceiling in the bathroom developed water stains that grew with each visit. The heating became even more unreliable. My father's dream of a garden remained just that, a dream, as he stared out at the small patch of communal concrete that passed for outdoor space in their apartment complex. By the time I turned 26, I had been promoted twice and had established myself as one of the firm's most reliable analysts. My personal life, however, remained on hold. My apartment was tiny and sparsely furnished. My car was 12 years old with fading paint, and vacations were something other people took. Every spare dollar went into that special account, which grew slowly but steadily. Setting these financial goals to help my parents while watching my sister pursue her artistic dreams without the same level of sacrifice sometimes made me question my choices. But whenever doubt crept in, I'd remember my father's face as he talked about that garden, and I'd transfer another portion of my paycheck into savings. The 8 years that followed my graduation were defined by one word: sacrifice. I adhered to a saving plan so disciplined it would make the most frugal financial advisor proud. My tiny one-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of Seattle cost just $700 a month, far below market rate, because of its location near train tracks and the constant noise that came with it. My routine was calculated down to the penny. Breakfast was always oatmeal with a sliced banana. Lunch was homemade sandwiches carried in reusable containers. Dinner was batch-cooked meals that I prepared on Sundays and ate throughout the week. Restaurant outings were birthday treats only, and even then I'd order the least expensive menu item. The car I drove was a 1998 Toyota Corolla with fading blue paint and a tendency to make concerning noises when it rained. I named it Old Faithful and prayed it would last until I reached my savings goal. When friends from the firm took ski trips to Whistler or beach vacations to Hawaii, I smiled and said, maybe next year, knowing full well that next year would bring the same answer. Beyond my full-time position at the accounting firm, I took on side gigs that filled every spare hour. I did tax returns for individuals during tax season bookkeeping, for small businesses on weekends, and financial literacy workshops at the community center one evening a week. Holidays weren't for relaxation. They were opportunities for seasonal retail work and the time and a half pay that came with it. The promotions at work came steadily, from junior accountant to senior accountant to team lead. Each step brought a salary increase that didn't change my lifestyle, but accelerated my savings plan. My colleagues spent their bonuses on designer clothes or down payments for their own homes. Mine went straight into high-yield savings accounts and conservative investment funds. "Aren't you ever going to treat yourself?" my coworker Lisa would ask after a particularly grueling quarter when we all received performance bonuses. "This is my treat," I'd reply, showing her the deposit confirmation on my phone. "I'm almost halfway to my goal." Lisa couldn't understand, but her parents had given her a car when she turned 16 and helped with her down payment on a condo. She'd never watched her father count pennies at the kitchen table or heard her mother's worried whispers about making rent. Every few months, I'd drive the 3 hours from Seattle to Portland to visit my parents. Each visit followed the same pattern. Amanda would dominate the conversation, with tales of her latest artistic endeavors or relationship drama. My mother would fuss over her making her favorite meals and asking detailed questions about every aspect of her life. My father would slip me a beer and ask about work, his interest genuine but brief. Neither parent ever asked why I drove an old car or wore the same clothes visit after visit. They never questioned the absence of vacation stories or romantic partners. My sacrifice was invisible or perhaps expected. With each visit, I noticed their apartment deteriorating further. The landlord neglected basic repairs, knowing my parents couldn't afford to move elsewhere. The carpet in the living room became threadbare. The kitchen sink developed a persistent leak that left a rusty stain. The neighborhood, once merely modest, began to feel unsafe. Most concerning was my father's health. At 62, he developed high blood pressure that his doctor attributed to stress. "Housing insecurity at your age isn't helping," the doctor had told him, according to my mother. She mentioned this casually over coffee, not connecting it to the growing sum in my savings account. 7 years into my plan, I had accumulated $60,000. The market in Portland had risen, but I adjusted by cutting even more corners. I canceled my internet service and used the free Wi-Fi at the public library. I walked 3 miles to work when the weather permitted to save on gas. I sold my collection of vintage vinyl records that had been my one indulgence. In the 8th year, the final push became almost manic. I took a third side job doing overnight inventory at a warehouse. I sold clothes I rarely wore and furniture I could live without. When a pipe burst in my apartment and ruined my mattress, I slept on an inflatable camping mat for 2 months rather than spend money on a replacement. Finally, in December, just before my 32nd birthday, I checked my accounts and saw the number I'd been working toward for nearly a decade, $80,000. Enough for a 20% down payment on a $400,000 home in a decent Portland neighborhood. Enough to give my parents monthly payments they could afford on their fixed income. Enough to make my father's garden dream come true. The excitement of finally reaching my goal made all those years of sacrifice feel worthwhile. I called my best friend Tara and actually cried when I told her. "You did it," she said. "I still think you're crazy, but in the best possible way. Your parents are going to be blown away." With my savings goal reached, I began the house hunting process. I contacted a Portland realtor named Sarah Williams, who specialized in homes for seniors, and explained my situation. "That's the most selfless thing I've ever heard," she said after I told her my plan. "Let's find your parents the perfect home." Finding the perfect house for my parents became my new obsession. I'd spend evenings after work scrolling through listings Sarah sent analyzing neighborhood safety statistics, proximity to medical facilities, and, of course, garden potential for my father. After 3 weeks of searching, Sarah called with excitement in her voice. "I think I found it," she said. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, single-level ranch-style 15-minute walk to Laurelhurst Park, where your dad likes to feed the ducks, and the backyard has established garden beds and southern exposure. Perfect for growing those tomatoes you mentioned. The asking price was $390,000, just under my budget. I flew to Portland that weekend to see it in person, and the moment I walked through the front door, I knew. The house wasn't fancy, but it was solid with hardwood floors beneath worn carpet and a kitchen that opened to a sunlit dining area. Most importantly, through the backsliding glass doors, I could see the garden space that would become my father's sanctuary. "This is it," I told Sarah. "Let's make an offer." Working with Sarah and a mortgage broker named Michael, I secured financing using my entire life savings as a down payment. The mortgage was calculated based on my parents' fixed retirement income with me as a co-signer to strengthen the application. The monthly payments would be just $700, nearly $200 less than their current rent, for an apartment half the size. I met with a lawyer named Thomas Edwards to prepare the gift documents. He explained the various options for transferring property and the tax implications of each approach. "The cleanest way is to purchase it in your name and then gift it to them later after closing," Thomas advised. "This protects everyone and allows time for proper financial counseling for your parents." I agreed with his recommendations, signed the necessary paperwork, and set a closing date for April 15th. The timing seemed perfect, as it was 2 weeks before my father's birthday. Planning the surprise became almost as detailed as my savings strategy had been. I coordinated with my parents' neighbors to ensure they'd be home on the afternoon of April 20th. I arranged for catering from my father's favorite barbecue restaurant. I even contacted their church friends to attend the key presentation ceremony. The day arrived with perfect spring weather. Amanda, who I'd reluctantly included in the planning, helped decorate the new house with streamers and balloons. She seemed genuinely happy to be part of something positive for our parents, even if she hadn't contributed financially. "This is amazing, Henriette," she said, as we arranged flowers on the kitchen counter. "I could never have done something like this. They're going to be so happy." Her acknowledgement of my achievement felt surprisingly good after years of being in her shadow. Perhaps this gift would finally change how my family saw me. When our parents arrived supposedly for a birthday lunch at a nearby restaurant, their confusion turned to shock as friends and neighbors greeted them with cheers. I stepped forward, house keys dangling from a blue ribbon in my hand. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "For the past 8 years, I've been saving every penny I could. Today, all that saving has paid off. This house is yours. The garden out back is yours. No more rent, no more landlords, no more moving. This is your home." The tears in my father's eyes as he took the keys from my hand made every sacrificed vacation, every skipped dinner out, every night of overtime worth it. He embraced me so tightly I could hardly breathe. "My sensible, serious girl," he whispered. You did this for us. My mother stood speechless, a rare occurrence before joining our hug. I don't know what to say, she managed finally. Say you'll accept it, I replied. Say you'll plant those tomatoes and sit outside on summer evenings. We accept, my father said firmly. With all our hearts, we accept. The celebration that followed was everything I'd hoped for. Friends and family toured the house offering congratulations and housewarming gifts. For once, I was the center of attention, receiving praise for my generosity and foresight. Even Amanda seemed genuinely impressed, though she joked about me being the golden child now. The weeks that followed were filled with the joy of helping my parents settle into their new home. I took a week of vacation time to help them move unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. My father immediately began planning his garden, poring over seed catalogs at the kitchen table that now had a view of trees instead of a parking lot. My mother, initially overwhelmed by the space, soon began making it her own. She hung curtains, arranged family photos, and even invited her church friends over for coffee, something their small apartment had never accommodated. For a brief, beautiful period, I felt like the favorite daughter. My parents called me daily with updates about the house and neighborhood. My father sent photos of the first seedlings emerging in his garden beds. My mother bragged about my Henriette's incredible gift to anyone who would listen. After years of sacrifice and invisibility, this recognition felt like finally stepping into the sun. I returned to Seattle with a lightness I hadn't felt since childhood, certain that I had forever changed my relationship with my family for the better. The first hint that something wasn't right came about 3 months after my parents moved in. I called one Sunday evening to check in, and a family friend named Barbara answered the phone. Oh, Henrietta, she said, sounding oddly surprised. We're all here for a little housewarming for Amanda. Your parents are showing us around her new house. It's lovely what you did for your sister. For my sister, I repeated, confused. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I bought the house for my parents. Oh, Barbara sounded flustered. Of course that's what I meant. Here's your mother. My mother came on the line, her voice overly bright. She quickly changed the subject when I asked about Barbara's comment talking, instead about a new recipe she'd tried, and how the neighborhood book club had invited her to join. A week later, I tried to arrange a visit, but my parents became strangely evasive. This weekend isn't good, my mother said. We're having some work done on the house. What kind of work, I asked, concerned about unexpected expenses. Just some updating, she replied vaguely. Amanda knows an interior designer who's giving us a good deal. This was the first I'd heard about renovations, which seemed odd since I was the co-signer on the mortgage. Still, I didn't want to be controlling, so I agreed to visit the following month instead. Through social media, I began seeing photos of changes to the house that I hadn't approved or even been consulted about. The subtle gray walls I'd selected with my mother were now a bold teal. The original hardwood floors I'd planned to refinish had been covered with trendy patterned tile. Most concerning was a photo of the third bedroom, which had been transformed into what looked like an art studio, with Amanda's supplies and works in progress. When I finally managed to visit in August, I was surprised to find Amanda's car in the driveway alongside my parents'. Inside, her presence was everywhere. Her jacket on the hook by the door, her favorite cereal in the pantry, her mail on the counter. Is Amanda staying here? I asked as casually as I could manage. Just temporarily, my father replied, not meeting my eyes. The lease on her apartment ended and she's between jobs again. You know how the art world is. I nodded, trying to be understanding. After all, the house had 3 bedrooms, and helping family was the whole reason I'd purchased it. Still, something felt off about the situation, especially when Amanda arrived later that evening and moved through the space with the comfortable familiarity of someone who lived there permanently, not temporarily. More concerning was the pile of mail I noticed addressed to me despite never having lived there. Bank statements, property tax notices, and official-looking letters from the county recorder's office sat unopened on a side table. Why is my mail coming here? I asked my mother. Oh, the mortgage company must have your name on file since you co-signed, she said, quickly gathering the envelopes. I've been meaning to forward these to you. The visit grew increasingly uncomfortable as I noticed more changes. The garden my father had been so excited about now featured an elaborate koi pond and sculpture area that he admitted was Amanda's project. The garage had been converted into a gallery space for her work. On my way out of the neighborhood, I stopped to chat with Mrs. Calloway, an elderly neighbor who had attended the key ceremony. "How are you liking the new owners?" she asked innocently. "New owners," I repeated. "Your sister and your parents seem very happy there," she clarified. "It was so nice of you to help them all out." Driving back to Seattle, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. The next day, I received a call from Portland Trust Bank regarding changes to the mortgage transfer paperwork. When I explained I hadn't requested any changes, the representative seemed confused. "We have forms here with your signature authorizing the addition of Amanda Winters to the deed, with transfer of primary ownership," she explained. "They were submitted last month." "I never signed anything like that," I said, my voice rising with alarm. "Well, someone signed your name," the representative replied. "Perhaps you should come in person to review the documents." My mind reeled with possibilities, none of them good. I called my parents that evening, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked directly about the mortgage transfer. "It's just a small adjustment to make things simpler for everyone," my mother said dismissively. "Since Amanda's living there now, it makes sense for her to handle the day-to-day house matters." "But I never authorized adding her to the deed," I insisted. "Well, we took care of all that paperwork," she replied, an edge entering her voice. "No need for you to worry about it." The call ended with vague reassurances that everything was fine and they'd explain more next time I visited. But the anxiety that had started as a small knot now expanded to fill my chest entirely. Something was very wrong with the house I had sacrificed 8 years of my life to provide. Unable to shake my growing anxiety, I decided to make an unannounced visit to Portland the following weekend. As I pulled into the driveway of the house I had purchased, I was shocked to see construction vehicles parked outside and a dumpster filled with what looked like original fixtures from the home. The modest ranch house was in the midst of a major renovation that I had neither approved nor been informed about. The front yard now featured a decorative pond where the simple flower beds had been, and the entire exterior had been painted a fashionable dark gray, with white trim replacing the warm beige I had chosen with my father in mind. I parked behind a catering van and followed the sound of laughter and music to the backyard. There, I found a full-blown party in progress. At least 30 people milled about on a newly installed deck that extended where my father's vegetable garden had once been planned. String lights hung from recently planted ornamental trees, and servers circulated with trays of appetizers and champagne. In the center of it all stood Amanda, dressed in an expensive-looking artist's smock, splattered with paint, gesturing dramatically as she spoke to a circle of admirers. "And this is just the beginning of my vision for the space," she was saying. "The studio addition will extend another 15 feet into the yard with north-facing windows for the perfect light." I stood frozen at the edge of the deck, unable to process what I was hearing. My sister was talking about my parents' home, the home I had purchased, as if it were her personal project. When she spotted me, surprise flashed across her face before she composed herself and waved cheerfully. "Henrietta, what an unexpected surprise. Everyone, this is my accountant's sister." She made her way over to me, champagne flute in hand. "What are you doing here? I thought you were buried in tax season prep or whatever it is you do." "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice tight with restrained emotion. "What happened to Dad's garden, and why is there a construction dumpster out front?" Amanda laughed lightly, linking her arm through mine and pulling me away from the curious glances of her guests. "We're just making some necessary updates. The place was so basic before. Don't worry, Mom and Dad are fine with it. They're visiting Aunt Susan this weekend." "With what money?" I demanded. "These kinds of renovations cost tens of thousands of dollars." "We took out a home equity line," she said casually. "The property values in this neighborhood are skyrocketing, so it made perfect sense. You can't take out a loan against a house you don't own." Amanda's expression changed, then her smile turning into something more like a smirk. "Actually, I can. The house is in my name now." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What are you talking about? I bought this house. My name is on the deed and mortgage." "Was on the deed," she corrected. "Mom and Dad transferred everything to me last month. They said it made more sense since I'm the one living here and making improvements." That's impossible, I whispered, through the pile of mail addressed to me, and the call from the bank suddenly made terrible sense. They couldn't transfer the deed without my signature. Amanda shrugged, taking another sip of champagne. Well, they figured you wouldn't mind. You're always so generous after all. And you make good money, so you can just save up and buy another house if you want one. The casual cruelty of her statement struck me like a physical blow. 8 years of sacrifice dismissed in a single sentence. I pushed past her and headed into the house, needing to see for myself what other changes had been made. The interior had been completely transformed. The practical, comfortable furnishings I had helped my parents select had been replaced with trendy and practical pieces that looked straight out of a design magazine. My father's recliner, the one comfort I had specifically bought with his back problems in mind, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, uncomfortable-looking metal and glass furniture filled the living room. In a daze, I made my way to what had been designated as my father's home office, where he kept important documents. The desk was now Amanda's, covered in sketches and art supplies, but the filing cabinet remained. I pulled open the drawer labeled House and began rifling through folders. There, in a file marked Property Transfer, I found what I was looking for: a deed transfer document with my signature at the bottom authorizing the transfer of the property to Amanda Lynn Winters. Except it wasn't my signature, not really. It was close convincing even, but missing the slight upward curve I always put on the final E in Henriette. My signature had been forged, and there was only one conclusion: my parents had done it. Clutching the document, I stormed back outside where the party continued. "Everyone needs to leave," I announced loudly. "This party is over." Amanda hurried over, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "What do you think you're doing? You can't just barge in here and—" I held up the forged document. "This is fraud, Amanda. This is a felony. I never signed this. My signature was forged, and I'm going to prove it." The party guests, sensing the tension, began to quietly gather their belongings and slip away. Amanda's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally a strange sort of pity. "Look, Henrietta," she said, in the condescending tone I had heard all my life. "Mom and Dad just did what they thought was best. They know you're good with money and can take care of yourself. I need this house for my art career, for the studio space, and to host gallery events like this. They're just trying to help both their daughters in the ways we need." "By committing fraud, by stealing my life savings." My voice cracked with emotion. "Where are they? I need to talk to them right now." "They'll be back tomorrow," Amanda replied. "But honestly, they're not going to change their minds. The decision is made, the paperwork is filed. Maybe you should just accept it and move on. That's what you're good at, right? Being practical." Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was my father, his timing eerily perfect, as if he somehow sensed the confrontation. With shaking hands, I answered and put the call on speaker. "Henrietta," he began, his voice unusually tentative. "Your mother and I just got a call from Amanda. She says you're upset about the house arrangements." "Upset," I repeated, my voice rising. "I found the transfer documents with my forged signature. You committed fraud, Dad. You and Mom stole from me." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "We didn't see it that way. We just redistributed the family resources where they were needed most. Amanda needs a stable home base for her career. You have a good job, a solid future. You can recover from this setback." "Setback?" I was nearly shouting now. "I gave you everything I had saved for 8 years, $80,000. My mother's voice came on the line then, sharp and defensive. "And we're very grateful, but Amanda's artistic gift needs nurturing. She can't develop her potential while struggling with housing insecurity. You've always been the strong one, the self-sufficient one. Amanda needs more support." The familiar refrain hit me with new force. Once again, my sister's needs trumped mine, but this time it wasn't just attention or affection being diverted. It was my entire financial future. As the reality of what my family had done sank in, something broke inside me. "You had no right," I said, my voice suddenly calm and distant even to my own ears. "What you've done is not just morally wrong, it's criminal. I'm going to fight this, and if that means taking my own family to court, so be it." "Don't be dramatic, Henriette," my mother snapped. "This is family helping family. We just shifted resources to where they'll do the most good." "The most good?" I echoed, looking around at the transformed house that no longer held any trace of the dream I had worked so hard to provide. Dad's garden is gone. His recliner is gone. This isn't about helping the family. This is about taking from me to give to Amanda like it's always been. I ended the call and turned to my sister, who had been listening with a complex expression mixing guilt and defiance. I'm contacting a lawyer tomorrow. You should do the same. This isn't over. As I walked to my car, the magnitude of the betrayal threatened to overwhelm me. The family I had sacrificed everything for had repaid me with theft and deception, all while expecting me to simply accept it because I was the strong one. In that moment, I realized that strength would now mean fighting for what was rightfully mine, even against the people I had wanted most to help. The morning after discovering my family's betrayal, I called in sick to work for the first time in my career. I spent the day in a daze, alternating between bouts of furious tears and periods of numb disbelief. How could the people who raised me, who were supposed to love me, commit such a calculated act of deception? By afternoon, I had pulled myself together enough to make an important call. My company's employee assistance program connected me with David Mercer, an attorney specializing in property law and fraud cases. I scheduled an emergency consultation for that same evening, unable to bear waiting any longer for answers. David's office was in a converted Victorian home in downtown Seattle, the kind of place that normally would have put me at ease with its warm lighting and comfortable furniture. But as I sat across from him, clutching a folder containing photos of the forged documents and printouts of my bank statements, I felt nothing but cold dread. "Let me make sure I understand the situation correctly," David said after I had explained everything. "You purchased a home for your parents using your entire life savings as a down payment. You co-signed the mortgage but put the deed in your name with the intention of eventually transferring it to them. Now you've discovered they forged your signature on documents transferring ownership to your sister instead." "Yes." I confirmed, my voice steadier than I expected. "And they've already taken out a home equity line of credit to fund extensive renovations." David's expression was grim as he reviewed the photos of the documents. "What we're dealing with here isn't just a family disagreement. It's financial fraud and identity theft, both serious criminal offenses. The forgery of your signature on legal documents is particularly problematic." "Criminal?" I repeated, the word sticking in my throat. "You mean my parents could go to jail?" "Potentially, yes," David replied, his tone gentle but firm. "Forgery of this nature with this dollar amount would likely be charged as a felony. However, you have options about how to proceed." He outlined 3 possible approaches: a civil suit to reclaim the property, and damages pressing criminal charges for the forgery, or attempting mediation before escalating to legal action. Each path had its own complications and emotional costs. "What would you do?" I asked, overwhelmed by the choices. David leaned back in his chair. "I can't make that decision for you. But I will say this, in my experience, financial fraud within families rarely happens in isolation. It typically indicates a pattern of exploitation that won't stop without intervention." His words hit me with unexpected force, bringing to mind a lifetime of small sacrifices demanded of me, while Amanda received unquestioning support. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a family dynamic that had always placed my needs last. "I want to pursue this legally," I said finally. "Both civil and criminal complaints if necessary. I can't let them take everything I've worked for." Once the decision was made, things moved with surprising speed. David filed emergency injunctions to prevent any further financial activities related to the property, and submitted evidence of the forgery to both the court and the county recorder's office. He also sent formal letters to my parents and Amanda, outlining the legal actions being initiated and offering one last opportunity for voluntary resolution. Their response came not through legal channels, but in a barrage of angry phone calls and messages from extended family. Apparently, my parents had shared their version of events, casting me as an ungrateful daughter, trying to renege on a gift and hurt my struggling artistic sister out of jealousy. "How could you do this to your own family?" demanded my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, in a scathing voicemail. "After everything they've done for you?" My cousin Michael texted, "Taking your parents to court. Seriously, what kind of person does that? Each message twisted the knife deeper, not just because of their accusations, but because not a single family member questioned my parents' actions or considered my perspective. The narrative of me as the practical, emotionless daughter who didn't need support had been so thoroughly established that no one could imagine I might be the victim rather than the villain. The estrangement from my entire extended family was just the beginning of the aftermath. The legal process drained my emergency fund and forced me to take out a loan to cover attorney fees. My performance at work suffered as court dates and depositions pulled me away from projects and disrupted my concentration. My boss, Michael, called me into his office after I missed a crucial client meeting due to an emergency hearing. "Henrietta, you've always been one of our most reliable team members," he said, concern evident in his voice. "But lately your work has been inconsistent and clients are noticing. Is there something going on that we should know about?" The kindness in his question broke through the professional facade I'd been desperately maintaining. To my horror, I burst into tears in front of my boss, something I'd never imagined doing. Between sobs, I explained the situation, expecting judgment or impatience. Instead, Michael listened attentively, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "That's absolutely devastating," he said when I finished. "And you've been dealing with this alone." I nodded, embarrassed by my emotional display, but too exhausted to pretend anymore. "The firm has resources that might help," he offered. "Our legal department could review your case pro bono, and we can adjust your workload temporarily. Plus, our health plan covers therapy sessions, which, frankly, anyone would need in your situation." His support was the first kindness I'd experienced since discovering the betrayal, and it opened the door to finding other allies. My colleague Jessica, overhearing part of my conversation with Michael, invited me to dinner that weekend. Over pasta and wine, I shared the full story with her. "My God, Henriette," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I always thought my family was dysfunctional, but this is next-level betrayal. What can I do to help?" "Just believing me helps more than you know," I admitted. "Everyone else seems to think I'm the villain for not letting my sister have the house." Jessica's indignation on my behalf was healing in a way I hadn't expected. "That's insane! You worked for years to save that money. No one has the right to take it from you, family or not." With Michael's encouragement, I began seeing Dr. Rivera, a therapist specializing in family trauma. Our weekly sessions became an anchor in the stormy seas of the ongoing legal battle. Dr. Rivera helped me see that my family's actions reflected their issues, not my worth, and gave me tools to handle the intense emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. "What you're experiencing is a profound grief," she explained during one particularly difficult session. "You're not just losing money or property, you're losing the family you thought you had. It's okay to mourn that loss." The legal process ground on painfully slowly. My parents hired an aggressive attorney who filed motion after motion to delay proceedings. Amanda gave tearful interviews to local arts publications about how her dream studio and career were being threatened by family discord, carefully avoiding any mention of forgery or fraud. The most grueling part was the depositions where I had to sit across from my parents and sister while they testified under oath. My mother claimed she had verbal permission to sign my name. My father insisted it was a misunderstanding about the nature of my gift. Amanda maintained she knew nothing about the forged documents, believing the transfer was legitimate and agreed upon by all parties. Listening to their distortions and outright lies tested my resolve daily. There were moments when settlement offers tempted me, moments when I questioned whether the emotional cost of fighting was worth it. But each time I wavered, I remembered the 8 years of sacrifice, the nights I'd slept on an air mattress to save money, the promotions I'd celebrated alone because my family was too busy with Amanda's latest exhibition. This wasn't just about money. It was about finally standing up and saying that my contributions mattered, that I would no longer be the family resource to be drained without acknowledgement or gratitude. 10 months after filing the initial complaints, we finally had our day in court. The evidence of forgery was clear, the paper trail of my savings, and the down payment indisputable. When the judge delivered her ruling, her words were unequivocal. "The court finds that the defendants engaged in deliberate fraud by forging the plaintiff's signature," she stated. "The property transfer is hereby nullified and the original deed reinstated in the plaintiff's name. Furthermore, the defendants are ordered to repay all equity withdrawn from the property, plus the plaintiff's legal fees and additional damages in the amount of $20,000. It was a complete legal victory. The prosecutor's office declined to pursue criminal charges after my parents agreed to the civil judgment, sparing them from potential jail time. But as I sat in the courtroom watching my family leave without a glance in my direction, the emotional victory felt hollow. I had won back my house and my money, but lost my family in the process. 6 months after the court ruling, I stood in the empty living room of the house I had fought so hard to reclaim. The trendy furniture was gone. The art studio dismantled, the koi pond filled in. What remained was a shell of the dream I had once held for my parents, now tainted by betrayal and legal battles. The decision to sell the house rather than keep it came easily. Every corner held memories I wanted to forget. Every room echoed with the arguments and accusations of the past year. I contacted Sarah, the original realtor, who had helped me find the property, and explained the situation. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she said, her voice filled with genuine sympathy. "The market has appreciated since you purchased it. Even after paying off the mortgage and equity line, you should walk away with more than your original investment." She was right. The housing market in Portland had continued its upward trajectory, and despite Amanda's questionable renovation choices, the property sold within a week for $470,000. After settling all debts and legal fees, I recovered my original $80,000 plus an additional $30,000 in equity and damages. With the proceeds, I found a modest one-bedroom apartment in a quiet Seattle neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it had large windows that flooded the rooms with light, and a small balcony where I could nurture potted herbs and flowers, a tiny echo of the garden my father never got to plant. Starting over at 33 wasn't what I had planned, but there was a certain freedom in rebuilding from scratch. This time, I balanced saving with living. I opened a retirement account and made regular contributions, but also bought a comfortable mattress to replace the air mattress I'd slept on for so long. I invested in a good coffee maker and occasionally splurged on fresh flowers for my kitchen table. Small pleasures, but significant steps toward a life where I valued myself enough to invest in my own comfort. Dr. Rivera continued to guide me through the process of emotional recovery. Our sessions focused increasingly on establishing healthy boundaries and recognizing my own worth outside of what I could provide for others. "The pattern in your family was that your value was measured by what you could give or sacrifice," she observed during one session. "That's not love. It's exploitation. Real love doesn't demand constant sacrifice from one person while privileging another." Her words helped me process the sporadic contact attempts from my family. My father called once shortly after they moved to a smaller apartment, his voice stiff as he explained they were adjusting to new circumstances. My mother sent a Christmas card with no personal message, just a generic printed greeting. Amanda never reached out at all. Each contact brought a complex mix of emotions: longing for the family I wished I had, anger at their continued lack of accountability, and grief for the relationship that seemed irretrievably broken. I responded politely but distantly, maintaining the boundaries Dr. Rivera had helped me establish. "Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing people to hurt you again," she reminded me. "It means releasing the hold that anger has on your life so you can move forward." Moving forward meant rebuilding not just my finances, but my social connections as well. Jessica, who had supported me through the worst of the legal battle, introduced me to her friend group, who welcomed me without judgment. My boss, Michael, continued to mentor me, helping me regain my professional confidence, and eventually promoting me to senior financial analyst. Most surprisingly, I found connection through a support group for victims of family financial abuse, a phenomenon I learned was far more common than I had realized. Sharing my story with others who truly understood the unique pain of being betrayed by those who should protect you became an unexpected source of healing. Through the group, I met Diane, a retired teacher whose son had emptied her retirement accounts, and Marcus, whose parents had stolen his identity to take out loans in his name. Their journeys from victimization to reclaiming their lives gave me hope that I too could find my way to a meaningful future. 2 years after the court ruling, I received an unexpected email from my father. It wasn't an apology, not directly, but it contained a photo of a small garden he had planted on their apartment balcony. "Thought you might like to see the tomatoes finally came up," he wrote. It was minimal, but it was something, an acknowledgement of the dream we had once shared. I replied with a photo of my own balcony herbs and a brief note, "Mine are growing too." We began a cautious exchange of garden updates, never discussing the past, but finding a thin thread of connection in this shared interest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a tiny green shoot of possibility. My mother and Amanda remained distant, unable or unwilling to acknowledge the harm they had caused. I accepted that some relationships might never be repaired, that family sometimes means recognizing when ties have been damaged beyond what can be mended. Instead, I focused on building my chosen family friends who celebrated my successes without jealousy, colleagues who respected my contributions, neighbors who checked in during winter storms and brought soup when I caught the flu. These connections, based on mutual care rather than obligation or genetics, taught me that family could be found in unexpected places. 3 years after the betrayal that shattered my world, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint the Seattle skyline in gold and pink. My emergency fund was rebuilt, my retirement account growing steadily, and a small vacation fund waited for the trip to Italy I had promised myself as a 35th birthday gift. The wounds of betrayal had scarred over, still visible, but no longer raw and bleeding. The most profound change wasn't financial, but internal. I had learned to value myself not for what I could provide to others, but for who I was. The responsible, practical traits that my family had exploited were actually strengths when applied to my own well-being. My capacity for loyalty and sacrifice, when directed toward those who genuinely reciprocated, created deeper connections than I had ever known. Looking back at the naive woman who had saved for 8 years to buy her parents a house, I felt compassion rather than regret. She had acted from love, and though that love had been betrayed, the capacity for generosity wasn't something I wanted to lose. I had simply learned to pair it with discernment about who deserved such gifts. The greatest lesson from this painful journey was that family isn't defined by blood, but by love in action, by mutual respect and care that flows both ways. Those who truly love you will never ask you to diminish yourself for their benefit or take what isn't freely given. As night fell over the city, I made a silent promise to myself. I would continue to be generous, but never again at the cost of my own well-being. I would give from abundance, not deprivation, and I would surround myself with people who saw my worth beyond what I could do for them, people who gave as freely as they received. In the end, losing my life savings bought me something more valuable than a house: the knowledge of my own strength and the wisdom to build a life rich in authentic connections. It was a high price to pay for such lessons, but sitting in the peaceful home I had created for myself, I knew I wouldn't trade this hard-won wisdom for any amount of money. What does family mean to you? Has someone you trusted ever betrayed you? And how did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and healing. Thank you for listening. And remember that sometimes our greatest strength emerges from our deepest wounds.